Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, 50 Asks in 50 Weeks. As he said, my name is Jenny Taylor, and I'm the Marketing Specialist here at GuideStar. I have a few housekeeping items before we begin. First of all, we're going to be live tweeting during today's presentation using the hashtag 50asks50weeks, so please join the conversation on Twitter. Secondly, as mentioned before, we are happy to take questions from you all during the presentation. We'll try to answer as many as we can before our time is up. And again, to submit a question, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If we can't get to all of your questions before our time is up, we'll post more of the answers on the GuideStar blog at trust.guidestar.org. And finally, we will send all of you an email with a link to the presentation and today's recording in a few days. I'm now happy to introduce Amy Eisenstein. Amy is an author, speaker, trainer, and consultant, as well as the owner of TriPoint Fundraising, a full-service consultant firm for nonprofit organizations and foundations. Her published books include Raising More with Less, an essential fundraising guide for nonprofit professionals and board members, and 50 Asks in 50 Weeks, a guide to better fundraising for your small development shop. Amy's third book on major gifts for small development shops will be published in the spring of 2014, so be sure to keep an eye out for that one. Amy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Hi, and thanks for joining me. Since you've taken the time to be here, I hope you are ready to make a plan to raise significantly more money this year and next year. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Did you know that most nonprofits ask for less than 50 gifts per year? And most ask for many less than 50. So before we get started, I want to ask you some questions and have you really think about these questions. How can you or those nonprofits that are asking for so few gifts expect to raise a lot of money by asking so infrequently? Sorry, I jumped the gun there. So I was recently at a conference where the speaker compared fundraising to baseball. In baseball, to get in the Hall of Fame, you need to hit the ball 1 out of every 3 times you are up at bat. That's to get in the Hall of Fame. That means you strike out 2 times for every 3 tries up at bat. And for some reason, fundraisers just aren't willing to strike out. So how many times do you get no? And how many times are you asking? That's what we're going to talk about today. Do you know how frequently you ask for contributions? Do you know how much you ask for over the course of the year? How many total dollars you ask for over the course of a year? I'm not going to ask you to keep baseball quality stats today, but I'm confident that you could raise more if you know more about what you're asking for, how frequently, how effectively, how efficiently. Do you know the difference between the amount you ask for and how much you receive? How much more could you raise if you asked more frequently? And you might be thinking, how could I ask more? My desk is piled to the ceiling. I have work coming out of my ears. Well, today is going to be about strategies to ask more effectively and efficiently. So how much more could you raise if you asked in smarter and more effective ways? An important part of creating an effective development plan is knowing the answers to some of these questions and the ability to be more strategic. So striking out, like in baseball, striking out in fundraising is relative. You don't really strike out in the same way that you strike out in baseball. It is about quality, not just quantity, so we're not going to just focus on quantity of asks today. But I bet there are things holding you back, and that's from raising more money, and that's really what we're going to discuss today. So if you're feeling like this, I assure you, you are not alone. And at the end of this hour, you're going to be feeling so much better than this poor woman. I'm going to help you identify 3 simple steps for creating a fundraising plan and raising significantly more money. So let's get started. The 3 simple steps are: step 1, get ready. Assess where you are. Step 2, get set, create a plan. And step 3, go, implement that plan. So step 1, get ready. It's the assessment. It's going to include counting your asks, creating a baseline, and understanding key fundraising strategies for success. Here's an example of the number of asks that a homeless shelter was doing that I was working with. They were asking for about 6 foundation grants. They were writing grants. They were asking for 3 sponsors at the awards dinner, 1 year-end appeal, 2 email solicitations, and 3 individual face-to-face asks for a grand total of 15 asks or solicitations. Now, mind you, they weren't even getting gifts for all of these asks, but this is how often they were asking. And once I helped them create a plan, they added a few strategic asks to their plan and started to raise significantly more money with no additional staff or resources. And that's key, because I know that you're probably in an organization that is not going to add significantly more staff or resources, but you need to raise more money anyways. 50 asks in 50 weeks is about knowing how many asks you make so you can make more. So the question is, how are we going to count? And let me explain. Grant proposals, if you are writing to a specific foundation, answering their questions, following the guidelines, it counts as 1 ask. Sponsorship proposals, same thing. This isn't about sending 300 letters to all the companies in your town or city and asking them to sponsor your event. It's about personalizing your sponsorship proposals. Maybe you have a board member who works at a company who can add a personal touch or hand in personally the sponsorship proposal so that it gets looked at more carefully. So that's really counts as 1 ask when you customize it. Individual solicitations, so anytime you sit down with somebody face-to-face and ask for a gift to your organization, that certainly counts as 1 ask. And bulk mail or email also gets 1 ask. And so I don't care if you're mailing a letter to 500 people or 50 people or 50,000 people. We're going to count it for our purposes here today as 1 ask. So using that method of counting, I want you to take a quick moment and think about the number of asks that you're making at your organization. How many asks do you think you're doing now? If you total up the grant proposals you're submitting, the bulk mail solicitations you're sending, the individual asks you're doing, and the events or sponsors, I count an event invitation as 1 ask in the bulk mail category, and then any personalized sponsorship requests you're doing as 1 ask. So if you can just think for a minute, are you doing less than 25, between 25 and 50, or more than 50? So how many ever you're making, this is your baseline. And it's really important to understand where you are. You may be asking for many more than 50, so you may be thinking, okay, well, this isn't for me because I'm already asking more than 50 times a year, counting the way that Amy just said. But if that's the case, that's great. But how many more times and how much more strategic could you be? So it actually doesn't matter what your baseline is as long as you know where you are. And so if you are at an organization where you're making currently about 15 or 20 asks, like the example I gave earlier, honestly, you're no different than many, many other small organizations that I work with on a regular basis. And actually, it doesn't matter the size of the organization. Sometimes I work with huge organizations in terms of budgets, but they have a very small fundraising program, either because they get a lot of money for fee for service or government grants or whatever the case, but they really are raising very little money in terms of what size the organization is. So it doesn't matter what size organization you're at. It really makes a difference how big your development shop is and how much you're raising. And that's how I determine whether you're a big or small development shop or fundraising shop. So anyways, so whether you're raising 20, asking 20 times a year, it may be unrealistic to think that you're going to get to 50 next year. And if you're raising, so your goal may be 30 asks next year or 35. And if you're asking more than 50 times, how many more times can you ask in each of the different categories? And we'll get into that in just a minute. But the key is knowing your baseline, knowing how many times you're asking. The next part of step 1 is understanding 3 key strategies for raising more money in a small development shop. So 1 is asking frequently. We're really going to focus on that. Step number 2 is asking smart, and 3 is diversifying your funding base or asking diversely. So the first key strategy is frequency. In my book, 50 Asks in 50 Weeks, I really focus on frequency as a way that most organizations can raise significantly more money because I have found in my work with organizations that most organizations are not asking nearly as frequently as they could be or should be given the resources they have. And we'll talk about why. But it's not just about quantity, it's about quality too. So back to baseball for a second. The difference between a player who hits only once out of every 4 times up at bat or even every 5 times up at bat is the difference between somebody who goes to the Hall of Fame and someone maybe who doesn't even make the major leagues if you just go a few more notches down. And so the question is, how frequently are you asking, but also obviously how effectively and efficiently are you asking as well? So that comes to my second point, second key strategy for raising more money, and that's asking smart. And I worked at a battered women's shelter as one of my first fundraising jobs. And when I arrived, they were doing a Valentine's Day card sale. This was a card sale that the organization had been doing for years, and the executive director and the board loved it for a variety of reasons, but it was a infusion of unrestricted operating cash in February when they desperately needed unrestricted money. But unfortunately, it was so much work to sell these cards on the part of board members and staff members, and ultimately we were really only raising a few $1,000s. So it wasn't a smart fundraiser. They weren't getting any real new donors. It was just a cash transaction with people who didn't really care about the organization. So many reasons it was a bad fundraiser. So there was so much work and effort went into it, and we had to get rid of it because it wasn't effective or efficient. So it's not just about frequency. And the third strategy that is really important to me, especially at a small development shop, but at all organizations, is having a really diversified portfolio of funding sources. Too many organizations, excuse me, that are too reliant on one source, either government or the founding directors' funds, are in real trouble when fundraising gets tough and they don't have a diversified enough base of support. And we'll talk about how to make sure that you have a diverse base of support. So those 3 strategic issues, frequency, asking smart, and diversifying your fundraising base, are key to having a successful development plan. so that's step one, really getting ready, doing an assessment, making sure that you know that you count your asks, how many you're doing, and creating a baseline for yourself so that you know whether you've asked more the following year, and in what areas in terms of diversifying your funding sources and understanding those key fundraising strategies. I guess I want to say one more thing about counting your asks. It doesn't matter to me actually how you count them. I explained to you how I count them. You can count asks any way you want, as long as you're consistent from year to year. And that's where the creating a baseline comes into play. So if you want to count, asking every board member, and there you have automatically, 15 board members and you count them, that's fine. But you're going to need to count the same way next year, and so you're still going to need to ask more. So I often get a question, do you count your board as one? Do you count them each individually? That is totally up to you as long as you're consistent. Okay. On to step 2, get set. Now it's time to create your plan. Creating your plan includes identifying prospects or prospective donors, setting a goal for your fundraising plan, and creating a calendar. So is he a good prospect for your organization? Donald Trump. So I was once at a hospital foundation running a board retreat, and one of the things that we were talking about with the board members was prospective donors for the hospital. And one of the board members raised his hand and said, how about Donald Trump? And I got pretty excited because if Donald Trump is going to be a donor at your organization, you might do pretty well. And so I took a deep breath and I said, do you know Donald Trump? And the board member said, no. And I said, okay, has Donald Trump ever been a patient at this hospital? And the board members looked around at each other and said, no. Then, okay, so my response was, why on earth do you think Donald Trump is going to be a good prospective donor for your organization? And the fact is, he's not at that particular hospital. Because you want two things when you're trying to identify prospective donors for your organization and for your development plan. One is capacity. And Donald Trump certainly has that. That's the ability to make a gift. So are the people or organizations, corporations, foundations that you're going after have the financial resources and the ability to make a gift? That's number one. But number two is inclination. Are they, the people that you're going after for a gift, interested in your organization? Are they inclined towards your cause or your mission and your organization? Do they know about you? Do they have a passion for you? So you really want to think about those two things when you are putting people and organizations in your development plan. So the place that I always like to start looking when I'm building a plan for an organization is in their current list of donors. Go into your database and run a couple of different reports. One clearly is, who are your best and biggest donors, right? And I'm including corporations, foundations, and individuals. And you really want to look to all three. A lot of times I'll ask organizations to run their top 20 donors, and it will be all foundations, which is fine. I think that's the norm for many, especially small organizations. But then it's going to be important to look further down the list and figure out who are your best individual donors to date, too, because we really want to have some diversity and spread out our fundraising. And today, actually, we want to think and focus on individuals. Because it's so important to have those individuals and start bringing them up the donor pyramid and up the fundraising ladder and making them part of your big donor pool as opposed to just corporations and foundations. So you're going to want to run some lists. But in the event, let me back up, I'm sorry. So the reason that it's so important to look in your database first is that your current donors are your best prospective donors for the future. There's no reason, and lots of organizations, when I come to them, will say, okay, help us find donors. And the very first place to start is with your current donors and asking them for increasingly larger gifts. That's really the way to grow your fundraising program. Of course, you will need some new and outside donors too, but the first people to focus on are those that already love you. Because if you have some people with capacity and inclination, that is the place to go first. So in the event that you don't have a lot of donor history or you don't have a great donor database, you need to still create your prospective donor list. And who are you going to fundraise from, right? And so this is actually an exercise that I do with boards when I'm doing board retreats frequently. I will create a circle on a flip chart, and I will put the foundation or the organization in the middle. And I'll ask, who does this organization know? The organization knows past donors, volunteers, vendors, service providers, clients, depending on the type of nonprofit you are. And so getting them thinking about who does the organization know. Then on the next sheet, I'm going to do another circle in the middle with spokes out on this wheel and say, okay, put yourself in the middle now. Who do you know? Now, they as individuals know friends, they know family, colleagues, neighbors, probably social service providers and social clubs that they're in, and all sorts of other people, college friends, etc. And so when I'm working with board members to help create a list of prospective donors for my organization, if I'm not going to use, for whatever reason, current donors, or if we're looking to expand our donor database, this is a great exercise for you to do with your staff and board members. And ask them to think about these categories and pick one person from each category that might have some capacity and some inclination towards your organization. So capacity, listen, if we all hope to find Donald Trump in any of our circles, we might be waiting a long time for donors, and we may never actually find any. So it's really important to understand that we're looking for working, middle class, upper middle class people to be donors to our organization. If we wait around for millionaires and billionaires, we're going to be waiting for too long. So we're going to look for people with some disposable income that might be interested to donate, people who are philanthropically minded, and people who have some inclination towards our cause, perhaps. Now, we like to say you can grow inclination or interest in your organization. You can't grow capacity generally with people. So it's important that the people that you pick out of these circles, one friend, one family member, one colleague, one neighbor, that you're going to try and solicit this year for your organization. They should have some capacity, and you can help grow their inclination by introducing them to the organization, bringing them on a tour, and helping them get to know your organization better. So anyways, once we've created our prospect list, then it's time to create a goal. And I love this guy because he is really happy with his money, and he is thinking big. And we want to start to think big and set a big goal. All right, so we're not going to set a goal based on last year's income. Think, this year's goal, did you set it based on 5% more than last year what you raised, or 10% if you were being really ambitious, more than what you raised last year? or even based on the hole in your budget, which to me is one of the worst ways to set a fundraising goal. So if that's how you've set goals in the past, I want you to throw all that out the window. You're never going to set a goal like that again. How you're going to set a goal is based on what you actually think you can raise, not based on what you raised last year, because one may have nothing to do with the other. And how you're going to set your goal is by creating a gift table, just like the one I have on the screen, based on the number of prospective donors you have and who they are and what you think they can give. And you're going to include in this table any campaigns you're doing, any events you're doing, any grants you're writing. So the number of prospects all the way to the left, we have 4 at the top. So here our goal, we got to $100,000. Let's say you want to raise $100,000, and we need to figure out, am I going to be able to raise that money this year? So I have 4 prospects or prospective donors or events or foundation funders, it doesn't matter what it is, campaigns, that I think will raise $20,000, right? That's how much I need for that gift. So it turns out, in reality, just like being up at bat at baseball, is that not all of the people you ask, not all the grant funders, not all the individuals, or not even the events that you have are going to raise that $20,000. So you really are counting on 1 out of 4 to actually come in at the $20,000 level in this example. When you drop down a level, those 3 people that didn't give you the $20,000 that you were counting on them for, hopefully they're going to be in this next category of 9 that will give you $10,000. Because it's not like if you ask a grant funder or an individual or host an event, and they said, no, we can't give you $20,000, most of them, hopefully, are not going to disappear into nothing. Hopefully, they'll give you less. They'll still be donors. So they're going to drop down into that 9 category, and then you actually need 3 donors to turn into reality out of those 9 for gifts of $10,000 each. I hope this is making sense, and please feel free to type in a question if it doesn't make sense. But anyways, so I want you to set your goal based on reality of what your prospect pool looks like, what campaigns you're having, what grants you're applying for, and get to your goal that way. Now, I also want you, like the guy in the previous slide, to dream really big, because I think one of the reasons that nonprofits don't raise a lot is because they think that they can't. And so I want you to set your goal higher than you think you can, make it ambitious, and yet achievable. Okay. The next step in creating a fundraising plan is we're at the plan. You've identified your prospects. You've now set a goal, hopefully, and now you're going to put your prospects from your list that when you identified either through your database and through your board members, who are you going to solicit for money this year? Now, they could be groups of people, like with an annual fund mailing or at an event. So it doesn't just have to be individuals. But what I want you to do is create a 1-page document, maybe yours will be 2 pages, with January through December down the left-hand column. And then we're going to put Ask 1, Ask 2, Ask 3, Ask 4 across the top. And you've got a grid with just about 50 asks. Now, you don't need 1 ask per space. That's taking this too literally. You can have 2, 3, 4, 5 asks in any given space, and then other spaces may be empty. But fill out this grid based on your campaigns and your prospects for the year. So column 1, Ask 1, is grants. When are your grant reports due? Not reports, applications due, I'm sorry. So when are your grant applications due? This actually grid also helps ensure that you have a diversified fundraising base base of support. So it works beautifully on a couple of different levels. You don't necessarily need to have even amounts of asks in each column, but ensuring that you do have a few asks in each column will help ensure that you have a diversified funding base. Sometimes when I go into organizations and we start this process, I'll see that a huge, disproportionately huge amount of money is coming from government. And, 10% is the rest of this grid, and 90% is government. And I know that they're way off balance. And so it's important to have a variety of grants, to start fundraising from individuals, have some direct mail campaigns, which also will feed your individual giving in future years in terms of major gifts and face-to-face fundraising. And, of course, you want to have one or two events in your events column. Now, if that events column is full, you are really event-heavy, too event-heavy. So you can put that. I have the gala invitation in column 3 as a mail request. You can move it over to column 4 if you feel better about that in your events. But really, events is about sponsorship fundraising. It's not about ticket sales. And I have a blog post on that if you don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm happy to answer that question. But really, where event fundraising money is raised at the event itself, at least, is through sponsorship. And so it's important to have those special asks there. So this is what the plan looks like. Let me pause for a minute. We'll review step 2 and ask Jenny if there's any questions in line so far, or maybe people are holding them till the end.
Hi, Amy. We do have a couple of questions,
Okay.
but I'm seeing some similarity in them, so maybe we can save them for the end so we can get
Okay.
some.
Do you want to ask one of them, or do you want to hold them for the end? It's up to you.
Sure. We've had a lot of questions about what counts as an ask, and we've had a couple questions about social media and how those fit into the asks.
Okay, good. So read me one of the questions about what counts as an ask. Is there more specific, or just what counts as an ask?
We have a donate button in your e-newsletter.
Okay.
Somebody asked about.
Great. Okay, that's a good one. All right. So let me go back to what I said before. And you can count anything you want as an ask, as long as you're consistent from year to year. So you don't have to use my system. You can use whatever system works for you, as long as you're consistent and you're not cheating yourself. And what I mean by that is if you give yourself more asks this year than last year, but you were really doing similar stuff. I mean, this is really a tool for you. And so the question about a Donate Now letter button in your newsletter is a great question. There is what I would consider a difference between a hard ask and a soft ask. And a hard ask is an appeal letter or an email that goes out to your donors that says the whole purpose of this correspondence with you, this either appeal letter or this email, is to ask you for money. So we're going to be telling you a story to tug on your heartstrings and tell you why you should give to us. That's a hard ask, and there's a Donate Now button, and I would certainly count that as an ask. A soft ask is more like in your regular newsletter, whether it's an e-newsletter or a paper newsletter, with a Donate Now button or a business reply envelope that goes along with your regular newsletter. But mostly the point of the correspondence is to educate people and update them on what you're doing. So it's a soft ask. You're not actually asking for money. You're letting them give to you if they feel so moved, but the point of the piece isn't to ask. So I wouldn't necessarily count those, although you certainly could, like I said, as long as you're consistent from year to year. So, if you have a weekly e-newsletter that goes out and there's always a Donate Now button, you could say, okay, Amy, I already ask 50 times a year because I send out this weekly email that has a Donate Now button. And I would probably turn around to you and say, okay, How much response are you getting? How personalized is it? Are you getting the results that you want and expect? Do you really want to count that as an ask? And so that would be my response. So good question. We'll keep going, and we'll have time for more questions at the end. So step 2, just a quick review, was to identify your prospects and campaigns and grant funders. Who are you going to be applying to for money or asking for money this year, and setting a goal based on those prospects and campaigns that you think you're going to have, and creating a calendar for you to use. That's the plan part. Now, this may be the most challenging part yet. So creating the plan may seem a little bit challenging, but implementing is really the key to success here, because you can have the best plan in the world. Like I always say, to my clients, I can create a plan for you that's 40, 50, 60 pages, but if it sits getting dusty on a shelf, it doesn't do anyone any good. So I'm actually happier sometimes with my one-page plans for my smaller development shops that they can tack on the wall over their desk and track and update and change. It's a living document. So this plan isn't locked in stone for the year either. Every month, check in, review it, and make sure that you're on track. So that's what we're going to actually talk about now. Getting past barriers, roles and responsibilities, and accountability to make sure that you implement your plan and that you raise significantly more money this year and next year. So what barriers do you face at your organization that might stop you from getting this plan accomplished or accomplishing this plan? It could be an executive director who hates to fundraise. It could be board members who don't show up or participate in the process. It could be that you don't have any full-time fundraising staff or inadequate office infrastructure or supplies. Maybe the computers you have don't work. Whatever the case may be, if you have significant barriers to fundraising, these are things that you're going to want to face and deal with before you even try and tackle your plan, because you may be fighting an uphill battle if some of these issues are barriers to your fundraising. And unfortunately, we don't have time to tackle all of those important barriers, but I think it's important to acknowledge them, because you may be working with them. They may be the white elephant in the room, and nobody talks about it, and nobody tries to deal with it. So my point is really to bring these issues to the surface and deal with them. Say, to your executive director, hey, I was just on a webinar provided by GuideStar, and the expert on the line said that, if the board members won't help with fundraising, or if you won't help with fundraising, or we don't have adequate supplies, we're really facing an uphill battle. And what are we going to do about this together, right? And so dealing with some of those barriers to fundraising, to implementing your plan before you go out and implement your plan, and then perhaps aren't successful because you have these underlying issues to deal with. The second thing that I want to talk about is roles and responsibilities. And I just used this slide to show different roles and responsibilities. Fundraising is more effective when volunteers are used. It's a fact. And so the question is, are all the people who have roles and responsibilities on your fundraising team participating in the ways that they should be? The executive director has a role to play. They're the face of the organization. They're the visionary. Honestly, they're the person that big donors and all donors actually want to meet and hear from and get to know. Volunteers play a critical role in fundraising, especially your board members, in terms of going out and talking to donors and telling them why they give their time and their financial resources as a motivator for other donors. And what is the role of the development director? Making sure that the development director is behind the scenes and everything is in order and ready to go that needs to be, creating the plan and helping facilitate, making sure the executive director and the volunteers have the tools and resources and information that they need to go out and be successful for fundraising. So I think that those, making sure that all of those roles and responsibilities are in place and any barriers that are faced are really important to tackle with, to face and deal with before you even think about fundraising. Now, I want to provide you also with some accountability tools to make sure that this plan is as successful as it can be. So I'm going to suggest a weekly development team meeting. And you may be thinking, oh, no, not another meeting. And this weekly development team meeting is comprised of all those people. It's different. Let me just first say it's different than your boring, typical meeting. You're not going to look like these people because it's a different kind of fundraising meeting. I was talking about this meeting, this weekly meeting that you have, and I say that it's short. It's only a 15-minute meeting per week. It doesn't drag on for an hour or, God forbid, 2 hours. It's a 15-minute weekly accountability meeting with all the members of your development team. If you're in a really small shop, you may be thinking, team, what team? But it's the executive director. If you can get a board member to participate, hopefully your board chair or your development committee chair, this meeting can be conducted over the phone so that they can participate. If there's no development staff at your organization, it can include an administrative assistant who's probably helping with setting up meetings or thank you letters or some component of fundraising, and, of course, development staff if you have them. But this cup of coffee reminds me of this person who was in one of my sessions once who said, to keep the meeting to 15 minutes, you can bring your coffee, but you can't sit down. And I just thought that was great. You can have this meeting around the water cooler. And the reason that I know that this meeting is short is because that there are only 2 items on the agenda every week at this meeting, and they're the same 2 agenda items every week. And I bet you can guess what they are. The first agenda item is, what was our ask scheduled for last week? Did it get done? How did it go? Who was responsible for it? And what follow-up needs to be done? So it's really about past asks, right? What happened in the last week to 2 weeks, and what follow-up needs to happen, and how did they go? And what do we need to ensure getting the gift? And, of course, that means that the second agenda item is, what are the upcoming asks for next week or the week after? Who's responsible? What needs to get done, and who's going to do it. And these, to me, these accountability meetings are more important than anything else you can do for the rest of the week for fundraising, because you don't want to show up at this meeting having not done what you were supposed to do from the last meeting. And I find that at small organizations where the executive director may not have a background in fundraising or really doesn't know what they're doing with regard to fundraising and would actually, honestly, rather avoid it like the plague, and the poor development staff member is left on their own, never to be bothered by their executive director, and can go for weeks and weeks without making an ask. I'll tell you that when I was at a small development shop in my first organization, I worked my butt off. I was busy writing newsletters, planning events, writing grant reports, dealing with the database, writing thank you notes, but I wasn't asking for money. So if I went back and counted my asks, I would have very few, like 10 or less, because we were doing one appeal and one event with little or no sponsorship, and a few other things, and I was working really hard, but I wasn't prioritizing asking. And I think that when you prioritize asking, you will find quickly that asking more frequently will lead, as long as you're doing it smart, not ineffective asking. Like, you don't want to ask 100 times and get no money and say, but Amy said to ask a lot, but you weren't asking the right people or in the right way. So it's about quality as well as quantity, because asking 100 times and getting no gift does not do you or your organization any good. But moving asking back to the front burner and making it a priority at your organization will yield you significantly more results than anything else we could talk about. I was once at a conference, and this woman was talking about a newsletter and how she had to do her newsletter. And the presenter, it wasn't me, said, I was in the audience, and said, you know, what difference does it make if your newsletter is 2 weeks late? And the woman's like, well, I have to get it out. Well, that's true. But if you can get an ask out over your newsletter, I would argue that that's significantly more important. So it's really about bringing these asks back to the front burner, prioritizing, raising significantly more money, and then you can hire somebody else to write your newsletter. What do you think of that? So hopefully that's good. So a weekly development team meeting where there's 2 agenda items. One is past asks, and 2 is future asks, and making sure that those are all wrapped up. The second accountability tool is what I call a Monday morning ask. If your goal is to do 50 asks in 50 weeks, that's approximately 1 ask per week. And so it's about getting it out of the way on a Monday morning. So it's about sending out that grant request on Monday morning, even if it's not due until Thursday. It's about getting that bulk mail solicitation to the mail house on Monday morning, even if you don't want it to drop until the following, Thursday, whatever the case may be. It's about picking up the phone and calling that donor and scheduling that appointment. Are you going to meet with every donor on a Monday morning? Absolutely not. But picking up the phone and making that call, because I can tell you from experience that I could go weeks without calling a donor because I had other things to do, and calling the donor made me a little bit nervous. And so I would write my newsletters and thank you notes and fiddle in the database and do all sorts of other things like event planning, and put off calling the donor week after week after week, and months went by, and I wasn't calling that donor. So I don't know if you've heard of a book called Eat That Frog. It's by Brian Tracy. This is not the picture from the cover. This is just a picture I found of somebody eating a frog. But it's actually a Mark Twain concept, and it comes from the concept of doing your worst task first and getting it over with. And so I challenge you to eat your frog every Monday morning and do whatever ask you have and get it out the door. And whether it's your worst task or not, don't procrastinate. This book, Brian Tracy's book, Eat That Frog, is an anti-procrastination book. And it basically talks about if you do your worst task of the day first, the rest of your day will go well and be great. It'll all be smooth sailing after that. So to implement your plan, you need to get past your barriers. You need to figure out your roles and responsibilities and make sure that everybody's playing their part. And you need to set up some accountability tools so that you really are ready to implement the plan and keep on track. So just a quick review. Step 1 was get ready. Do your assessment, and that included counting your asks. It included creating a baseline and understanding those key fundraising strategies, which were ask frequently, ask smart, and diversifying your fundraising base. So really, I challenge you, go out and do step 1. Do an assessment. Figure out how many times you're asking a year. And I bet you will be surprised and stunned at how infrequently you're currently asking. And it's not a criticism. It's just the way these small development shops work. And that is what I think has been so fascinating about the concept of 50 asks in 50 weeks, because people are really able to raise more money once they realize how few times a year they're asking. Just being alerted to that fact will help you raise more money because your consciousness has been raised about how much or infrequently you're asking. So step 2 is get set, create that plan. That includes identifying your prospects and your campaigns for the year, setting a realistic yet ambitious goal. Really, set that goal high and aim for the stars, and creating a calendar that you can follow, a realistic calendar of asks throughout the course of the year. And step 3, of course, is go, and that's about implementing your plan. So getting past any barriers that you may have, identifying the roles and responsibilities of people, and, of course, accountability. So I'm going to leave you with a challenge. I challenge you to get out of your comfort zone and out of your fishbowl that you've been swimming around in. Get out, see new things, implement this plan, create the plan, implement the plan, and get out of your comfort zone and let me know how it's going, because I would love to hear. So now we left, I think, just about 5 minutes to answer any questions that might be there. Jenny?
Yes, we have a lot of great questions, so we'll get through as many as we can. And just to remind everybody on the phone, if we don't get to your question, don't worry. Amy has offered to answer some on our blog later. So, Amy, here's one to start with.
Okay.
If an organization doesn't have a lot of manpower to run a campaign, is it worth it to ask people who may not have a lot of money to try to accrue a lot of small donations? Or is it better to pool resources to try to hit up the bigger options?
Yeah, so that is a great question. So the only campaigns, you're asking about grassroots campaigns versus a very traditional fundraising pyramid where the bulk of the money comes in through the top donors. You know, I'm sure you've heard before that 10% of the donors give 80 to 90% of the money, and then the other 80 to 90% of the donors give only 10% of the money. So where are you going to focus your efforts, on the few donors that give the bulk of the money, or the base of the donors that give the least money, I guess? So the only time I've seen real grassroots campaigns work, well, of course, we have the example of the Obama campaign. We've never seen anything like that in fundraising before, but also disaster relief. So small grassroots campaign fundraising works for the Red Cross, certainly with the typhoon this week in the Philippines, and those type of things. But I would strongly encourage you to focus all of your time and attention and your resources on your top 20, 30, 40 big donors, and you will raise significantly more money than you do if you spread yourself thin going after lots and lots of little donors. You won't get to your goal.
Great. And speaking of big donors and foundations, is there a surefire way to try to decide how much money you should ask from them?
Oh, that's a good question. So the first thing, and I guess I hope this is obvious to most people, is to go on the corporation or foundation's website and see what their past giving has been. So that's a starting point, because most of the times foundations, well, they list either in their annual report, it's public information, how much they've given, and usually there's a pretty consistent range. So if you see a foundation giving one $100,000 grant and then 10 or 50 $5,000 grants, you may be tempted to say, oh, we might be that one that gets $100,000, but clearly that's somebody that they know and work with and have a history with. Their typical grant is $5,000, so that's what you're going to ask for. If you have an organization where you can't find the information, or it's a wide range, they give a lot of different size grants, I would call somebody at the foundation and try and ask, as a first-time grantee, what should we apply for? And so if there's anybody that you can contact and ask, you can talk a little bit about, maybe they'll listen to what you want to apply for. But also, sometimes when that's not a helpful guideline, apply for what you need. So No foundation funder is going to want to fund your whole project. Let's say you're raising $100,000, just to use a round number. You're not going to ask one funder to give you all $100,000, but maybe, you can say, well, we're applying to 3 or 4 people, and we were hoping you'd give us $25,000 or $50,000 or something, and we'll go to a few other funders. But start with what they give.
Excellent. And when talking about individual donors, are you seeing any trends about how individuals prefer to be asked?
Yeah, I think it depends on the donor, really. There's all sorts of studies out about how millennials like to be asked versus baby boomers. And so, I think there was a question before about social media that I didn't ask. I'll come back to that in a second. But I think that you have to try and figure out from your donors the best you can, whether you do surveys or ask them personally, the best you can as to how they like to be asked. And try and be responsive. If you have the technology to say, okay, this donor always gives through, online, or this other donor only gives through the mail, using your judgment that way. I don't think there's any rule of thumb. You do want to try and get in the habit of asking your biggest donors in person, face-to-face. That's clearly the most effective way. And I have a year's worth of blog posts this year on taking people step-by-step how to do that, how to create those relationships and start asking for gifts in person. So I hope you'll check out my blog to see that. Oh,
excellent.
Was there a question about social media? I can't remember what it was. I apologize.
There was, I think, just a general question about how social media fits into counting as an ask.
Okay, good. So in few instances these days, there are specific fundraising campaigns on social media, and I think it's starting to be more and more. So if you design a campaign, I think it needs to be really strategic and really smart. Certainly, you can count it. I would count each campaign as one ask in terms of social media. There's an organization called Charity Water, and they do a birthday campaign. Instead of asking for birthday presents, won't you ask your friends and family for birthday gifts? And they've been really successful with that campaign. And so, but I think that's one big effort, like a bulk mail solicitation, and it's sort of, random, like throwing a big fishing net out there. I would count that as one effort.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Time just flew by. Such great information. Thank you so much, Amy, for taking the time to be here. We all really appreciate it. And for all of you still with us on the phone, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We have a lot of exciting webinars coming up, including some that will be offered exclusively to our Facebook fans, so be sure to like GuideStar's page and keep tabs on our webinars at www.guidestar.org/webinars. And again, if we didn't get to your question, please check our blog at trust.guidestar.org for additional answers in the coming days. And watch out for that email coming soon with the presentation and the recording. Thank you so much again, and have a great day.